Overwhelming. How do we even contemplate millions of refugees or scores of thousands of people dead? But it is the small stories of parents sending their children out to scavenge food, or families being preyed upon by loan sharks just to get money to eat, or the children left behind orphaned and parents grieving for their dead sons and daughters. These are the tales of tragedy that make the misery of Syria so real. And Australian aid and relief groups have been working on the ground to try to relieve some of that suffering. Earlier I spoke to Misha Coleman, Executive Officer of the Australian Church's Refugee Task Force, who has had a close-up look at this civil war. I asked her just what the scale of this disaster is.
Well, you know, the numbers that are quoted are over 2.1 million, and, you know, those are those that we know about. Most of the refugees, 80% of the refugees, aren't going into the camps and aren't being registered, and they're being absorbed into towns and villages, into the countries that are taking them, so primarily Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. And people aren't registering because they fear reprisals later down the track. So the official numbers that we estimate 2.1 million people.
Now, of course, that's the number who have left Syria, but inside the country as well, there are millions more who've been left homeless.
That's exactly right. And I was on Skype tonight with a colleague of mine, a Christian colleague in Aleppo, and he was talking about that there's been an escalation in the rocket attacks in the area in which he lives. And he was talking about the people who are killed in rocket attacks, and they're largely or often homeless people who have been left, you know, with nowhere to go and nowhere to live, and of course children who are invariably, you know, exposed and playing around in rubble and that type of thing. So indeed those people without shelter are one of our primary concerns. The Australian Church's Refugee Task Force represents 8 churches in Australia, and many of us are trying to raise money for those people who are really in emergency need of things like, you know, basic things like shelter.
Now, when we look at a situation like this as well, there must be enormous disruption to families, family members who are killed, parents who are killed, children who were lost or missing or killed themselves. What does that do? How much more difficult does it make it when you're talking about such a dislocation of families?
Yeah, well, one family that I actually spoke to late last night, it was a family of 12, again in Aleppo. So it was a family, you know, 2 adults and 10 children, and they've moved. They lost their home and moved into a vacant office block, and quite a few families are doing that. The elder children are going out during the day looking for food and trying to scrounge whatever water and basics they can find, and that they, you know, bring that, you know, food and whatever they can scrounge up back to the family. And as it was a mother that I was talking to, and I thought, as a mother, can you imagine sending your children out to scrounge up something for the younger children? I can't even imagine what that would be like to do. And of course the costs have skyrocketed. She said that since August last year, the cost of bread has risen by about 8 times, powdered milk also about 5 times more expensive than July, August last year. And when there's meat available, which is not that often, you know, that's just a skyrocket as well. And of course, most people aren't working. The estimates are that 95% of the private sector are completely unemployed, and what that means for families is that they're borrowing money to buy food. So you can imagine that if and when this conflict is ever over, if the families that have stayed or that haven't been able to get out are going to be in enormous amounts of debt. Predatory credit practices are something that we're concerned about as well.
From what people are telling you, has this moved now beyond whether Assad goes or stays, what happens with the rebels, that people simply just want to have peace in their lives, irrespective of who's ruling the country?
Yes, I guess all wars have political causes and they have political solutions. So Syrians that I speak to now wonder what sort of a country will be left, regardless of who's in power. One of my colleagues that I was speaking to early in the week said that they're starting to talk about Syria as being a country for the infirm and the aged. They can't imagine who else will stay and what else will be left there. So the young people of any political persuasion really don't see much future within their country, and they actually can't imagine that they've never imagined their country to be in a state like this. So it's been such a shock, and of course, the future of especially young people is really uncertain, and that's why we're really trying to not just raise money now for the emergency food and shelter sort of requirements, but we want people and refugees want to go back, and they're going to need a lot of financial support to rebuild lives and get a economy going again.
Now, despite some progress internationally, this has proved a problem that's almost intractable for the international community and the United Nations. What are people telling you about what the ultimate circuit breaker may be, what a pathway may exist to actually bring an end to this fighting?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. I actually asked that very question to a colleague about half an hour before I came tonight, and he said that the people are very hopeful about a negotiated solution coming out of Geneva. Although in towns like, as Aleppo as an example, they've had a complete media and communications vacuum or blackout for the past month, and a week ago there was one road has been forged into the area, and hence we've sort of been able to get back online and in communication again. But I said, so what do you think that would look like? And he said it would look like a miracle.
Indeed. Misha, this is not just about Syria either, is it? It's having enormous implications, enormous knock-on effects for the rest of the region. What have you seen there and what have you heard there about the implications for the civil war in Syria on the rest of the region, and so many countries with so much at stake involved in this fight as well?
Yeah, look, the social tensions are increasing. Those countries which, have taken 500, 800,000 people are diverting their own economic resources from their own sort of, services and expenditure for their own populations into supporting people, fleeing across the borders. And so you can imagine that the domestic tensions within, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey are really a huge problem for those governments. And Jordan is already hosting around 500,000 Palestinian refugees, and so the generosity of those countries is mind-boggling when you think that Australia takes 13,500 asylum seekers a year and then calls them illegal. And we look at the situations in somewhere like Syria, where it's so obvious that people have no options, that they flee with everything that they can carry on their back, which is in many cases a child, and they get onto a boat because they have no options. And we were at the church's task force really very disheartened to hear the minister talk about these types of people as illegal. In Australia, it is not illegal to seek asylum. There is no law that says, either domestic or internationally, that says people who are seeing safety in Australia are illegal. And actually the converse is true. We say that it is legal, and we support that. So we were really very, very disappointed that type of language is being used, because it's not true.
Just finally then, for Australians who are watching what is taking place in Syria and wondering what they can do, What are the options open to people here about trying to make some sort of a contribution?
Well, there are a range of Australian humanitarian aid organisations who are working in the region. The Churches Refugee Task Force is a part of the National Council of Churches, and our overseas aid arm was involved with the ABC Syria appeal on the weekend. So Act for Peace has an active appeal. We've raised about $300,000 from Australians already, and that is going directly to our partners both within Syria and within the camps and for the urban refugees in those three primary neighbouring countries. And as I said before, there's the emergency aid and the emergency relief, but there is also an ongoing a longer term goal here, and that's to help rebuild those people's lives. So I also think that we can urge our own government in Australia to do what it can in the international diplomatic space. We currently have a seat on the Security Council, and as an organisation that promotes peace, we would be hoping that we use that position for every possible humanitarian outcome that we can get, including a negotiated solution for Syria.
Michelle, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for giving us your time again.
Thank you very much.